two old men gathered to pray to God in Old Jerusalem. One was a wealthy man, named Efim Tarasich Shevelev. The other was a not wealthy man, Elizzy Bodrov. Efim was a steady man. He did not drink, did not smoke tobacco, and did not sniff it. In a word, he never cursed throughout his life. I was a strict and firm. Efim Tarasich served 2 terms as an elder and had no beginning to the 3rd. He had a large family, 2 sons and a married grandson, and they all lived together. He was a healthy, bearded, and upright man. Only in his 70s did grey hairs start to emerge in his beard. Elizzy was an old man, neither rich nor poor. He used to work as a carpenter, and in old age he started to live at home and kept bees. One son went out to earn, the other stayed at home. Elizzy was a kind-hearted and cheerful man. He drank both vodka and snuffed tobacco, and he loved to sing songs, but he was humble, living well with his family and neighbours. Elizzy was a short man, dark-complexioned, with a curly beard and, like his namesake, the prophet Elizzy, bald on top. The 2 old men had promised a long time ago to go together, but there was always something that prevented Tarasich. He was busy with various matters. Just as one task finished, another began. He was marrying off his grandson, waiting for the younger son to be discharged from military service, or planning to build a new house. One day the old men met during a holiday and sat on logs. "So," says Elizzy, "when are we going to pay our tribute?" Efim frowned. "Well, we need to put it off," he said. "This year has been hard for me. I started building this house, thought I would finish it somehow in 100 days, but now it's creeping into the 3rd year, and I still haven't finished it. I guess I'll have to wait until summer. If God allows, we'll definitely go in the summer. In my opinion," says Elizzy, "there's no time to postpone. We should go now. It's the right time. Spring. Time is time, but the work is unfinished. How can I just leave it? Isn't there anyone to help you? Your son can handle it. How will he manage? The eldest is not trustworthy. He gets drunk. If we die, buddy, they'll live without us. Your son needs to learn too." "That's true, but still I wanted to finish things myself." "Oh dear man, you can never finish all the work. Just the other day, I had the women cleaning and tidying up for the holiday. There was so much to do, and they couldn't manage it all. The eldest daughter-in-law, a wise woman, said, 'Thank you,' she said. 'A holiday comes, doesn't wait for us, and no matter how much we do, we can't do it all.'" Tarasich pondered. "I've spent a lot of money on this construction. I can't go on a journey empty-handed." "A significant amount. 100 rubles. Elizzy laughed. "Don't be foolish," he said. "Your wealth is 10 times more than mine. Yet you're talking about money. Just tell me when to leave. I have nothing. But it will be there." Tarasich smiled slyly. "Look, a wealthy man has appeared," he said. "Where will you get it from?" "I'll scratch around at home and gather something, and if I come up short, I'll give my neighbour about 10 hives to sell. He's been asking for them for a long time. A good sale will be, you'll regret." "Regret? No, Betty. In my life, I've never regretted anything except my sins. There's nothing dearer than the soul." "That's true, but everything is wrong if it's not managed at home. And if it's unmanageable at home, it will be worse. But we've promised. We'll go. For sure, we'll go." And Elizzy convinced his friend. Efim thought it over, and the next morning he went to Elizzy. "So, let's go," he says. "You are right. In life and in death, God is free. While we are alive and strong, we must go." In about a week the old men gathered. Tarasich had money at home. He took 100 rubles for himself for the journey, leaving 200 rubles for his old woman. Elizzy gathered too. He sold his neighbour 10 hives to sell, and the increase he would get from 10 colonies. Also to his neighbour, he got 70 rubles for everything. The remaining 30 rubles he scraped together from everyone at home. His old woman gave her last savings, which she had been saving for funerals. His daughter-in-law gave hers. Efim Tarasich instructed everything to the elder son where to take the hay and where to take the manure, how to finish the house and cover it. He thought through everything. He instructed everything. Elizzy only instructed his old woman to plant the young hives from the sold ones separately and to give them to the neighbour honestly, and he did not talk about household affairs, saying that the thing would show itself how and what to do. You, being the hosts, will do it best for yourselves. The old men gathered. They baked homemade flatbreads, sewed bags, cut new leg wraps, put on new shoes, took spare bast shoes and set out. Their families saw them off as they went to the edge of the village and bid farewell, and the old men went on their journey. Elizzy went out with a cheerful spirit, and as soon as he left the village, he forgot all his affairs. He only thought about how to please his friend on the journey, how not to say a harsh word to anyone, how to get to the place in peace and love and return home. Elizzy walked along the road, and either whispered a prayer to himself or recited the lives of saints he knew from memory. Whenever he met someone on the way or came to stay overnight, he always tried to be as pleasant as possible and speak in a godly manner. He walked and rejoiced. The only thing Elizzy couldn't do was to stop snuffing tobacco. He left the snuff box at home and soon grew bored. Along the way, a man gave him some, and every now and then he would fall back from his friend so as not to lead him into sin, and he would take a sniff. Efim Tarasic was also doing well, walking steadily, not causing any trouble or speaking nonsense, but he had no peace of mind. He couldn't keep thoughts about his own household out of his head. He kept worrying about what was happening at home. Did he forget to instruct his son about something, and is his son doing it right? He would see people planting potatoes or hauling manure along the road and think, is my son doing it as I instructed? He felt as if he could return and show everything and do it himself. For the old men walked for 5 weeks, their home boots wearing out, and they had to buy new ones, and they reached the region of the Cossacks. They had paid for lodging and food while travelling, but when they reached the Cossacks, the locals began to invite them in insistently. They would let them in, feed them, and not take money, and even give them bread for the road, and sometimes fat breads. They travelled freely, covering about 700 versts, crossed another province and reached a barren area. They were welcomed and not charged for lodging, but the food started to run out. They wouldn't give bread everywhere either, sometimes even for money. It was hard to come by. The people were saying that last year there was no harvest at all. Those who had been wealthy had gone bankrupt and sold everything. Those who lived moderately had dwindled to nothing, and the poor either left entirely or wandered around or barely managed at home. In winter, they ate husks or lambs. One night the old men stayed in a place, bought about 15 pounds of bread, had a rest and left before dawn to cover more ground before the heat. They walked about 10 versts until they reached a river, sat down, scooped some water in a cup, dipped their bread in it, had a bite to eat, and changed their shoes. They sat there, resting. Elizzy took out his pipe. Efim Tarasic shook his head at him. How? He says, can one not give up such a pest? Elizzy waved his hand. I have been overpowered, he said, by sin. What can you do? They caught up and went on. They walked another 10 versts. They reached a large village, passed through it all. It became hot. Elizzy grew tired. He wanted to rest and have a drink, but Tarasic wouldn't stop. Tarasic was sturdier on foot, and it was hard for Elizzy to keep up with him. I would like to have a drink, he said. Well, drink up. I don't want to. Elizzy stopped. Don't wait for me, he says. I will just run into that little house to have a drink. I will catch up with you in a moment. All right, says he, and Efim Tarasic went ahead alone down the road, and Elizzy turned towards the house. Elizzy approached the house. It was a small, clay-plastered hut. The bottom was black, the top white, but the clay had peeled off. It hadn't been plastered for a long time, and the roof was opened on one side. The entrance was from the yard. Elizzy entered the yard. He saw a beardless, thin man lying on the porch, his shirt tucked into his trousers in the Cossack style. The man was apparently lying in the shade, but the sun came out right on him. He lay there but was not sleeping. Elizzy called out to him, ask for a drink, but the man didn't respond. Either he is sick or unfriendly. Elizzy thought and approached the door. He heard a child crying in the house. He knocked at the ring. Onus. No one reply. He knocked again with his staff on the door. Odd servants. No one stirred. Elizzy was about to leave when he heard someone sighing from behind the door. Is there not some trouble with the people? I should take a look. So Elizzy went into their house. For Elizzy turned the ring. It was not locked. He swung the door open, walked through the hallway. The door to the house was unlatched. To the left was a stove, right in front was the corner. There in the corner was an altar, table. Behind the table was a bench. On the bench sat an old woman in her chemise, undressed with her head on the table, and beside her a boy, thin as if made of wax, but with a round belly, pulling her by the sleeve, while he cried and asked for something. Lizzie entered the house. The atmosphere inside was heavy. He looked. Behind the stove a woman lay on the bed. She lay on her belly, and did not look up, only wheezed and stretched and pulled her leg, tossing it from side to side. The stench around her was heavy. It was clear she had soiled herself, and there was no one to clean her. The old woman raised her head, noticed the person. "What do you want?" she says. "What do you want?" "There's nothing, good man, nothing." Lizzie understood what she was saying and approached her. "I," he said, "a servant of God, came in for a drink. There is nothing, I tell you, nothing. There is nothing to take. Go away." Lizzie started to ask what. "Do you have no one healthy to help the woman?" "No one, good man, my husband is dying outside, and we are here." The little boy fell silent upon seeing a stranger, but as soon as the old woman spoke again, he grabbed her sleeve of bread, "Grandma, bread," and started crying again. Just as Lizzie was about to ask the old woman, a man stumbled into the house, walked along the wall and wanted to sit on the bench but did not make it and fell into the corner by the threshold, and he did not get up. He started to speak. He spoke one word at a time, catching his breath in between. "And illness," he says, "has struck. We are hungry. They are dying from hunger here." He pointed with his head at the boy and began to cry. Lizzie shook his purse off his shoulders, stretched out his hand, tossed the purse down, then picked it up onto the bench and began to untie it. He untied it, took out some bread, a knife, cut a slice, and handed it to the man. The man did not accept it but pointed at the boy and the girl, saying, "Give it to them." Lizzie handed it to the boy. The boy smelled the bread, stretched out, grabbed the slice with both hands, and disappeared into the slice. A girl peeked out from behind the stove, staring at the bread. Lizzie also gave it to her. He cut another piece and gave it to the old woman. She took it and started chewing. "I would like some water," she said. "My lips are parched." "I wanted," she said, "to bring it yesterday or today, I don't remember, but I fell and did not make it, and the bucket was left there, if someone didn't take it." Lizzie asked her where their well was. She explained. Lizzie went, found the bucket, brought water, and gave it to the people to drink. The children ate some more bread with water, and the old woman ate, but the man wouldn't eat. "I can't accept it," he said. "My soul can't take it." The old woman didn't even get up and didn't come to herself. She just tossed around on the bed. Lizzie went to the village shop, bought millet, salt, flour, and oil. He found an axe, chopped wood, and started to heat the stove. The little girl began to help him. Lizzie cooked soup and porridge, and fed the people. The man ate a little, and the old woman ate, but the girl and the baby licked the whole cup clean and cuddled up to sleep. The man and the old woman started to tell how all this happened to them. "We lived," they said, "even before that, not well, but here nothing grew. We started to eat through what we had since autumn. We ate everything, started asking neighbors and good people. At first people gave, but then stopped. Those who would have gladly given had nothing. Moreover, it became shameful to ask. We owed everything, both money and flour and bread. I," said the man, "looked for work. But there was no work. People were crowding everywhere for work. You work for a day, and the next you search for work." The woman and the girl started to go far off to beg. The alms were poor. No one had bread. Still, we managed to feed ourselves somehow, thinking we would get through until the new year. But from spring they stopped giving altogether, and then the illness struck. It became completely bad. We eat one day, and we don't eat for 2 days. We started to eat grass, either from the grass or due to some other reason. The old woman fell ill. "He old lady fell sick, and me," said the man. "I have no strength, and there is nothing to recover with. I alone," said the old woman, "was struggling, and have wearied myself without food and grew weak." The girl also became weak and became distressed. They sent her to the neighbors. She did not go. She huddled in the corner and wouldn't go. A neighbor came 2 days ago, saw that we were hungry and sick, turned around, and left. Her own husband had gone away, and she had no food to feed the little ones. Thus we lay, waiting for death. Lizzie listened to their tale and resolved on the same day to go catch up with his friend and spent the night there. The next morning, Lizzie got up, took up the work at home as if he were the master himself. He kneaded some bread with the old woman, heated the stove. He went with the girl to neighbours to gather what they needed. They found nothing. There was nothing. Everything was eaten up and neither food nor clothing. And Lizzie began to gather what was necessary, what he could make or what he could buy. He spent one day like this, then another, then a third. The little boy began to get better, started to walk around the bench, clinging to Lizzie, and the girl cheered up completely, helping with all the tasks. She ran after Lizzie for everything Grandad, Granddaddy. The old woman also got up and went to visit the neighbour. The man began to walk along the wall. Only the old woman remained lying down, but even she woke up on the third day and began to ask for food. Well, thinks Lizzie, I didn't expect to spend so much time wandering. Now I will go. The eye on the fourth day, the fast of Pascha approached, and Lizzie thought I will celebrate with the people, buy them something for the holiday, and in the evening I will leave. Lizzie went again to the village, bought milk, white flour, and lard. They prepared food and baked with the old woman, and in the morning Lizzie went to the service, returned, and broke his fast with the people. On that day the old woman also got up and began to move around, and the man shave, put on a clean shirt, which the old woman had washed, and went to the village to ask a wealthy man for help. They had pledged both the hay and the land to the wealthy man, so he went to ask whether he could return the hay and the land until the new year. The master returned in the evening gloomy and cried. The wealthy man would not have compassion, saying, "Bring me money." Lizzie pondered again. How are they, he thinks, going to live now? People will go to mow, but they have nothing. The hay is pledged. The rye will ripen, and people will begin to harvest, and it has grown well, thank God, and they will have nothing to collect till their only land is sold to the wealthy man. I will go away, and they will fall back to the way they were. And Lizzie became troubled with thoughts and did not go in the evening. He postponed it until the morning. He went to sleep in the yard. He prayed, lay down, and could not fall asleep. He had to go. So much time and money had already been spent, and he felt pity for the people. It seems impossible to help everyone. I wanted to bring them some water and give them a piece of bread, but it seems that it's gone too far. Now it's time to buy back hay and land. And if I buy back land, I must buy a cow for the children and buy a horse for the man to haul sheaves. It seems like you've got yourself tangled up. Brother Lizzie cousinage, you've come to a standstill, and I can't find any way out. Lizzie got up, took his coat from under his head, unfolded it, pulled out his pipe, and took a sniff, thinking to clear his head, but no, he thought and thought, but came up with nothing. He had to go, and he felt sorry for the people. He didn't know what to do. He rolled the coat back under his head and lay down again. He lay there, and as the roosters began to crow, he started to doze off. Suddenly he felt as if someone had awakened him. He saw that he was dressed completely, with his bag and staff, and he needed to go through the gates, but the gates were unlatched, only to let one person through. He walked to the gate, and his bag got caught on one side, wanting to unhook it. He got caught on the other side with the leg wrap, and it untied. He was trying to unhook it when a voice cried out, "Grandad, Granddaddy, bread." He looked down at his feet, and there the little boy was holding the leg wrap, while the old woman and the man were looking out the window. Lizzie woke up, speaking to himself aloud. "I will buy back the hay and land tomorrow, and I will buy a horse and flour for a new year, and I will buy a cow for the children. If you go to search for Christ across the sea, you might lose yourself in the process. I must help the people," and Lizzie fell asleep until morning. Lizzie woke up early. He went to the wealthy man, bought back the rye, paid the money, and for the hay as well. He bought a scythe, which had also been sold, brought it home. He sent the man to mow, and he went to buy a horse from a tavern owner. He bargained and bought it, and he bought a sack of flour, put it on the cart, and went to buy a cow. Lizzie was walking when he caught up with two Kokak women. They were talking among themselves, and Lizzie heard the women speaking in their language, but he could make out that they were talking about him. "Look, this is him who didn't recognize me." Such a thought to a simple man. He came in to have a drink, and there he goes, lives the same way. What didn't he buy for them? I saw him buy a horse with a cart from the tavern keeper, but there must be still people in this world. We should go see her. Hearing this, Lizzie understood that they were praising him and didn't go to buy a cow. He returned to the tavern owner, paid for the horse. He harnessed it and rode off with the flour to the house. He arrived at the gates, stopped, and got down from the cart. When the host saw the horse, They were amazed. It seemed to them that he had bought the horse for them, but they didn't dare to say. The master came out and opened the gates. "Where did you get this horse, grandfather?" he asked. "I bought it," said Elise. "It was cheap, so put some hay for her tonight, and take the sack off." The master unharnessed the horse, brought the sack to the barn, cut some grass and put it in the trough. They went to bed. Elise lay outside and took his bag out with him to sleep. The whole village slept. Elise got up, tied his bag, put on his shoes, donned his coat and went back on the road after Efim. For at 7 Elise walked about 5 versts. It began to get light. He sat down under a tree, untied the bag and began to count. He counted. He had 17 roubles and 20 kopecks left. Well, he thinks, with this I can't cross the sea, and collecting in the name of Christ. I better refrain from sinning much more. Efim Tarasich will reach it on his own. He will light a candle for me. As for me, evidently, my tribute will remain until death. Thank you, kind host, you put up with this. Elise got up, shook the bag off his shoulders, and turned around to go back. He just walked around the village so that no one would see him, and soon Elise reached home. They had already finished the harvest. His family rejoiced to see their old man, and they planned to ask him how and what. Why did he lag behind his friend? Why didn't he reach back home? Elise didn't tell them anything. "Well, God didn't bring me," he said. "I lost the money on the way and lagged behind my body, and I didn't go. Forgive me for Christ's sake." And he gave the remaining money to his old woman. Elise asked about the household affairs. Everything was fine. All the work was done. There was no deficiency in the household, and everyone lived in peace and harmony. That same day, Efim's family heard that Elise had returned and came to inquire about their old man. Elise told them the same thing. "Your old man," he said, "went on well. We parted," he said. 3 days before Peter's days I meant to catch up, but then matters came up. I lost my money and had nothing left to go, so I returned. People were astonished at how could such a wise man act so foolishly to go and not make it, only spend his money. They were amazed and forgot about it, and Elise forgot too. He took up the work at home. He prepared firewood for winter with his son, threshed the grain with the women, shut up the barns, put away the bees, gave 10 colonies of bees with progeny to the neighbour. His old woman wanted to hide how much had multiplied from the sold colonies, but Elise knew which were empty and which had increased, and gave the neighbour 17 instead of 10. Elise finished his chores, sent his son off to earn money, and sat down to weave bast shoes and carve beehives for winter. For 8 while Elise was staying in the house with the sick people, Efim was waiting for his friend. He moved not far and sat down. He waited and waited, dozed off, woke up, sat a little longer, but his friend was still nowhere to be found. He looked everywhere. The sun was already setting behind the tree, but there was no Elise. Could he have passed by me, he thinks, or perhaps he had been given a ride, someone carried him, and not noticed me, while I was asleep, but he surely wouldn't have missed me. The step is visible for a long way. If I go back, he thinks, he'll move ahead. We'll miss each other, which would be worse. I'll go forward, we can meet at night. He arrived at the village, asked the parish priest if that elderly man happened to come by, to take him to the same house. Elise did not arrive at the inn where they were supposed to sleep. Efim went farther, asking everyone, "And have you seen a bald old man?" No one had seen him. Efim was confused and went alone. We'll meet, he thought, somewhere in Odessa and go aboard together, and stopped thinking about it. He encountered a traveller on the road. The traveller was wearing a hood, a long robe, and had long hair. He had been to Athos and was now journeying to Jerusalem. They shared a night's lodging, got to talking, and set off together. They reached Odessa pleasantly. They waited 3 days for a ship. There were many pilgrims waiting. They came from different places. Efim asked again about Elise. No one had seen him. Efim got a foreign travel ticket. It cost 5 roubles. He paid 40 kopecks for the journey to and from, bought bread and herring for the road. They loaded the ship, transported the pilgrims, including Tarasich and the traveller. They raised the anchors, set sail, and went out to sea. The first day they sailed well. By evening, the wind picked up. It started to rain, and the ship began to sway and take on water. The crowd panicked, the women began to shout, and some of the weaker men began to run around the ship, looking for a place. And Efim was anxious but showed no signs. He sat on the floor, next to the tomb of old men, and sat there all night and the entire next day, only they held their bags and said nothing. On the third day, it calmed down. On the fifth day, they arrived at Constantinople. Some pilgrims disembarked to see the church of St. Sophia, which was now ruled by the Turks. Tarasic did not disembark but stayed on board. He only bought white rolls. They stood for a day and then sailed again. They stopped further at the city of Smyrna, at another city of Alexandria, and finally reached the city of Jaffa safely. In Jaffa, all pilgrims were disembarked. It was a 70-verst walk to Jerusalem on foot. At the same time, when disembarking, the crowd also got scared the ship was high and they threw people down from the ship into the boats, and the boat rocked. It seemed like at any moment someone might miss the boat and drown. 2 people almost drowned, but they all disembarked safely. They arrived and started walking. By the third day at noon, they arrived in Jerusalem. They stayed outside the city at the Russian courtyard, wrote their tickets, had lunch, and went with a traveller to visit the holy places. They did not yet have access to the Holy Tomb. They went to the patriarchal monastery. All worshippers gathered there. The women and men were seated separately. They were told to take off their shoes and sit in a circle. A monk came out with a towel and started washing everyone's feet. He washed, dried, and kissed, and went around everyone this way. He wiped Ephem's feet and kissed them. They stood for evening prayers, matins, prayed, lit candles, and remembered their deceased relatives. There they were fed, and wine was served. The next morning they went to the cave of Mary of Egypt, where she took refuge. They set candles, and a prayer service was held. From there, they went to the Abraham monastery. They saw the garden of the patriarch, the place where Abraham wanted to sacrifice his son to God. And they went to the place where Christ appeared to Mary Magdalene, and to Jacob's church, the brother of the Lord. The traveller showed them all the places and everywhere said how much money they should give. By noon they returned to the courtyard, had something to eat, and just as they were about to settle down to sleep, the traveller began rummaging through his clothes. They stole from me, he said, my wallet with money, 23 roubles, he said. I had 2 tens and 3 in small coins. The traveller lamented, but there was nothing to be done. They went to sleep. 9 Ephem lay down to sleep, and temptation struck him. They didn't take the money from the traveller. He didn't have any, I suspect. He didn't give anywhere. He ordered me to give, while he wasn't giving anything, and took a rouble from me. And the more he thought about it, the more he began to blame himself. What right do I have to judge a person? I'm sinning. I won't think of it. But as soon as he forgot, he began to remember again how the traveller was careful with money and how he talked unusually about his wallet being stolen. And who knows, he thinks, whether he had money. Just an excuse. The next morning they got up and went to early mass in the great church of Resurrection, to the Holy Tomb. The traveller did not stop following Ephem, going with him together. They reached the temple. There were many travellers pilgrims, Russians and many other peoples, Greeks, Armenians, Turks and Syrians gathered together. Ephem came to the holy gates with the crowd. A monk led them. He led them past the Turkish guards to the place where the Saviour was taken from the cross and anointed and where 9 large candlesticks were burning. He showed them everything and told them. Ephem placed a candle there. Then the monks led Ephem to the right hand, up the steps to Golgotha, to the place where the cross stood. There Ephem prayed. Then they showed Ephem the hole, where the earth fell down to hell. Then they showed him the place where they nailed Christ's hands and feet to the cross with nails. Then they showed him Adam's tomb, where Christ's blood fell on his bones. Then they came to the stone where Christ sat when they placed the crown of thorns on him, then to the pillar where they tied Christ when they beat him. Ephem then saw the stone with 2 holes for Christ's feet. They wanted to show him something else, but the crowd rushed ahead. Everyone hurried to the very cave of the Holy Tomb. A foreigner left from there, and Orthodox Mass began. Ephem went with the crowd to the cave. He wanted to slip away from the traveller. All in his thoughts, he considered the traveller to be sinful, but the traveller would not let him go, following him right to the Holy Tomb. They wanted to move closer but did not manage to. The crowd pressed together so tightly that there was no way to move either forward or backward. Ephem stood there, looking ahead, praying, but now and then he would check to see if the purse was still there. Conflicted thoughts entered his mind. First, he thought, the traveller is deceiving me. Second, he thought, if he wasn't deceiving me and they indeed stole from him, how would I not suffer the same fate? So Efim stood there, praying and looking ahead, into the chapel, where the holy tomb lay and where 36 lamps burned above it. Efim stood there looking overheads, what a wonder, under the very lamps, where the holy fire burns, ahead of everyone, he noticed a little old man in a coarse coat. The shiny bald head was the same as Elizzy Bodrov's. He looks like Elizzy, he thinks, but it can't be. He couldn't have outpaced me. The ship left a week before us. It's impossible he could have gotten ahead of me. I saw all the pilgrims on our ship. Just as Efim thought so, the little old man began to pray and bowed 3 times, once towards God, and then to the Orthodox world on both sides. And as the little old man turned his head to the right side, Efim recognized him. It was him, Bodrov, indeed, with his dark, curly beard, grey hair on his cheeks and brows, eyes, nose, and all his visage. It was indeed Elizzy Bodrov. Efim rejoiced to have found his friend, and he wondered how Elizzy could have arrived before him. "Oh, Bodrov," he thought, "how did you get ahead? It seems evident that you met someone who helped you along. I'll find him at the exit, and I will leave my traveller in the hood behind and walk with Elizzy, and perhaps he will lead me ahead too." And he kept watching to make sure he didn't lose sight of Elizzy. But when the services ended, the crowd began to sway, and they went to venerate the tomb, squeezing together, pressing Efim to the side. And again, the fear gripped him. What if, he thought, they stole my purse? Efim pressed his hand against his purse and began to push through, just trying to find a way out. He got out into the open, walked here and there, looking for Elizzy here and in the temple. He saw there were many different people in the temple. Some were eating, some were drinking wine, some sleeping, some reading, and there was no sign of Elizzy anywhere. Efim returned to the yard. Didn't find his mate. That evening, the traveller did not show up. He had disappeared, and didn't return even a ruble. Efim remained alone. The next day, Efim went again to the holy tomb with the Tambovelder with whom he sailed. He wanted to get ahead of Elizzy but was pressed again, and he stood by the pillar and prayed. He looked ahead. Again he saw Elizzy standing in the very holy place in plain view, arms spread, looking up as if he saw something above, and his shining bald head glimmered. Well, thought Efim, how I would miss him. He began to squeeze through. He made it through, but again, no Elizzy. It was clear he had left. And on the 3rd day, again, at the holy tomb, Efim looks in the holiest place, and there stands Elizzy, in plain view, arms spread, looking upwards as if seeing something above, and his head shone in the light. Well, thinks Efim, now I won't miss him. I will go to the exit and stand there. We won't miss each other there. Efim went inside, stood for a while, stood for half a day. The whole crowd passed, but no Elizzy. Efim spent 6 weeks in Jerusalem and visited everywhere, both in Bethlehem, in Bethany, and on the Jordan, put a seal on a new shirt at the holy tomb to be buried in it, took water from the Jordan in a bottle, soil and candles with the holy fire, wrote down memorials in 8 places, spent all his money, just to get home, and he set off back home. He reached Jaffa, ordered a ship, sailed back to Odessa, and walked home on foot, while 11 Efim rode alone on the same road. As he approached home, he was struck with worry about how the family was faring without him. In a year, thinks he, a lot of water passes. You build a house for a whole century, but it takes no time to ruin it. How did my son manage things while I was away? As spring uncovered, as the cattle weathered the winter, did they finish the house? He reached the spot where he separated from Elizzy last year. No one was to be recognized. Where last year people were suffering, this year they lived abundantly. It had grown well in the fields. The people recovered and forgot their former sorrows. In the evening, Efim approached the same village where Elizzy had fallen behind the last year. Just as he entered the village, a little girl in a white dress burst out from behind the hut. "Grandad, Granddaddy, come to us." Efim wanted to pass, but the girl wouldn't let him, holding him by the hem, dragging him to the house while laughing. A woman with a boy also came out to the porch, beckoning him, "Come in, dear Grandad, have supper. You can stay overnight." Efim went in. This is a good opportunity, he thinks. I will ask about Elizzy, how he came to that very house to drink. Efim entered. The woman took his bag from him, offered him water to wash, and seated him at the table. She brought milk, dumplings, porridge, set it all on the table. Tarasich thanked her, praising the people for welcoming the travellers. The woman shook her head. We can't not welcome travellers. We learned life from a traveller. We live forgetting God, and God punished us so that we waited for death. Last year we reached a point where we were all laying, and there was nothing to eat and we were sick. We might have died hoping in vain, but God sent to us a man like you, an old man. He came in to drink in the middle of the day and saw us, felt sorry for us, and stayed. He fed us, watered us, set us on our feet, bought our land back, and bought a horse with a cart for us. The old woman entered and interrupted the woman's speech. We don't know ourselves. He loved everyone. He felt sorrow for everyone. And he left. Didn't say a word. And who to pray to God for? We don't know. As I see it now, I lay waiting for death. And I watched. An old man came in. Simple-minded. So bald. Just wanting to drink some water. I even thought, in my sinful thoughts, what's he doing wandering here? But look what he did. Just saw us and set down his little bag. Right here where I'm sitting. Untied it. The girl joined in. No, she said. Grandma, he put his bag down in the middle of the house first and then put it on the bench. And they started arguing and recalling all his words and deeds, where he sat, where he slept, what he did, and what he said to whom. The master of the house rode in on horseback in the evening, and he began telling how Lizzie had lived with them. Had he not come to us, he said, we would have all died in sin. We were dying in despair, cursing God and people. He set us on our feet. Through him we recognized God and believed in good people. May Christ save him. Before, we lived like livestock. He made us human beings. The people fed Lizzie, gave him water to drink, laid him down to sleep, and went to sleep themselves. Lizzie lay awake and couldn't shake thoughts of Lizzie from his mind, how he had seen him in Jerusalem 3 times in front of the holy tomb. So, that's where he was. He thinks he preceded me. Have my efforts yielded fruit? And did the Lord accept him? The next morning, the people bade farewell to Ephim, packed him some pies for the road, and went to work, while Ephim went on his journey. For precisely a year passed for Ephim. In the spring, he returned home. He got home by evening. His son was not at home, he was at the tavern. When his son came back drunk, Ephim began to question him. He noticed everything. The lad had gotten himself into trouble without him. He had squandered all the money and let the affairs go to waste. The father began to scold him. The son became insolent. You should have managed, he said. You left to wander and took all the money with you. And yet you ask me. The old man was enraged and beat his son. The next morning, Ephim Tarasich went to the elder to discuss his son's behaviour when he passed by Lizzie's yard. Lizzie's old woman stood on the porch, greeting him. Hello, buddy, she said. How are you, dear? Did you return well? Ephim Tarasich stopped. Praise be to God, he said. I lost your old man, but I hear he has returned home. The old woman started talking. She loved to chat. He has returned, she said. The breadwinner, he returned a long time ago, pretty soon after Easter, it seems. We were so glad God brought him back. We missed him without him. Work has been done here thanks to him. His ears did not go in vain. Oh, how cheerful he is! Without him, it's like being without light in the eye. We feel so gloomy without him, cherished. We love him. How we do miss him. Is he home now? He asked. He's at home, dearest, tending to the bees, gathering swarms. He is worth much, she said. How bountiful a harvest God bestowed on the bees that an old man cannot even recall. And not for any sins, she said, God gives. Come in, dear. He'll be so glad to see you. Ephim walked through the hallway, across the yard to the bee yard to Lizzie. He entered the bee yard and saw Lizzie standing without a net, without gloves, in a grey coat under a birch tree, arms spread out looking up, and his bald head was shining like it did in Jerusalem near the holy tomb, and above him, just like in Jerusalem, through the birch trees, the sun played like a flame around his head, and golden bees circled around him like a crown without stinging him. Ephim stopped. Lizzie's wife called out to her husband. Buddy, she said, he's come. Lizzie turned around, rejoiced, and went to his buddy, gently brushing the bees from his beard. Hello, buddy, hello, dear man, did you have a good journey? My legs went a long way, and I brought you water from the Jordan River. Come inside, take some, and did the Lord accept your work well? Thank God. Praise Christ. Ephim paused for a moment. I've been there in body, but in soul it's God's work. Buddy, it's God's work. I also went into the house on my way back. Where you lagged behind, Lizzie grew startled and rushed to God's work, my friend. God's work. Well, come inside, I'll bring some honey. And Lizzie changed the subject, began talking about domestic matters. Efim sighed and did not mention anything to Lizzie about the people in that house or how he had seen him in Jerusalem. And he understood that in this world, by dying, God has commanded to pay off each person's tribute with love and good deeds.